It has been estimated that he was responsible for the death of 20 million people, representing around 5% of the world's population in the 14th century. His atrocities, which included mass beheadings and the burying of entire populations alive, knew no bounds. Through these means, Timur the Lame built the last of the great nomadic empires and placed himself among the ranks of history's greatest tyrants. Timur was born in 1336 in Kesh, Transoxania, near Samarkand, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Central Asia. His tribe was of little consequence, and his family had only minor military connections. In his early years, Timur resorted to theft in order to make his way. At some point, he was shot in the hand and the leg while trying to steal sheep. He never fully recovered from the injuries, which left him with a noticeable limp. As a result, he became known as Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane. Timur was born into a Mongolian tribe called the Barlas, of which his father had been chief. The tribe had been heavily influenced by the Turks by the time of his birth. By then, Central Asia had been divided among the successors of Genghis Khan. The region where Timur lived had been ruled over by the Ilkhanate dynasty. However, in the early 1300s, it had been ravaged by the Black Death. Ilkhan and his sons were victims of the plague. The Ilkhanate broke up into a number of petty states, each vying for supreme power. By the time that Timur came of age, the order that had once existed had been replaced by chaos. In his mid-20s, Timur began to emerge as a minor military leader. He also proved himself to be a skilled diplomat, playing off tribal leaders against each other. He headed a mercenary army to defend Transoxania from an invasion by the neighboring Chagatai Khanate ruler, Tughlaq. However, seeing that the invaders were too powerful, Timur switched sides and fought alongside Tughlaq. In recognition for his services, he was made governor of Transoxania. Around the same time, Timur's father died and he became chief of the Barlas tribe. Before long, Timur was ousted as governor of Transoxania in favor of Tughlaq's son. He fled to modern-day Afghanistan and began to build an army of mercenaries with which he could reclaim his authority over his homeland. In 1364, Timur led his army across the border and attacked the Chagatai army. Despite being outnumbered, his army routed all who stood against them, and the Chagatais were pushed out of Transoxania. Timur now entered into a bitter feud with his brother-in-law, Amir Hussein, for control over the land. The two men ruled over different parts of the kingdom. While Timur gained favor with the people with his generous policies, Amir alienated his subjects by imposing exorbitant taxes and other burdens. Around 1370, Amir surrendered to Timur and was later assassinated. Timur then married Amir's wife, who was a descendant of Genghis Khan. Timur now became the Emir of Transoxania. However, because he was not a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, he could not assume the title of Khan. This technicality meant that his rule lacked a certain level of authority. To overcome this problem, he installed a puppet ruler who was a descendant of Genghis. Timur took the title of Emir, or general. Timur now set about consolidating and expanding his rule over Central Asia. After conquering Afghanistan, he turned his attention to the west, taking possession of lands around the Caspian Sea. His army brutally crushed all opposition as the empire swallowed up every tribe and city in its path. The cruelty that Timur unleashed was something that had never before been seen. Mass beheadings were commonplace, and entire populations were known to have been buried alive. Timur's conquest in the west seemed unstoppable. By the 1390s, his empire had engulfed Baghdad, Karbala, and northern Iraq. In 1395, Timur's army marched to conquer Moscow. The Muscovite army gathered to oppose them on the banks of the Oka River. Meanwhile, all of Russia prayed for deliverance from the evil Mongol hordes. Then, without reason, the invading army turned and retreated. Moscow was saved. This miraculous deliverance is celebrated each August the 26th to this day. Timur may not have conquered Moscow, but he did rule over a vast empire, including most of Persia. In 1398, he turned south to India. Leading his army across the Indus River, he invaded the Delhi Sultanate. The first target was the town of Tulamba, which was laid to waste, with nearly all of its people being put to death. So feared was the invading army that many towns and villages surrendered without putting up a fight. However, Timur's rampaging army did meet stiff resistance at Batna, a city on the banks of the river Gagar, but it didn't last long. The garrison at Batna was overcome and its defenders killed to the last man. As Timur's army advanced through India, it was harassed by local peasants who would sneak in, loot the caravan, and then disappear. Timur responded by having 2,000 peasants slaughtered. After this, there was no more looting. When Timur's army reached Delhi in December 1398, they found the city to be heavily defended. The invaders were startled and distressed to see that the Indian army made use of elephants, covered in chainmail and with poison painted on their tusks. The elephants were the Indians' secret weapon, but Timur devised a counter to them. In preparation for the mass charge of the elephants, he had his men load sticks on the backs of camels and line them up facing the enemy. When the elephants came charging, Timur's troops set fire to the sticks and used iron rods to propel the camels forward. This caused the elephants to become spooked, and they turned to get away from the charging camels with flames on their backs. The Indians' secret weapon had backfired as dozens of elephants charged back at them. The confusion caused by Timur's brilliant strategy against the elephants was capitalized upon as the invading army surged forward. The defenders were overwhelmed, and Delhi became the latest great city to fall to Timur. By the time he left, Timur had reduced the city, which was one of the most affluent in the entire world at the time, to ashes and had killed more than 100,000 of its residents. With the Sultanate of Delhi now under his realm, Timur set his sights on the Ottoman Empire. However, his conquest was interrupted with revolts in a number of conquered Mesopotamian cities. Timur, who by now was known as the Prince of Destruction, reacted swiftly, and hundreds of thousands were executed without mercy. With the insurgency quashed, Timur refocused on further conquest to the west. The Ottoman Empire was ruled by Sultan Bayezid I. He and Timur were bitter rivals, with the two men having exchanged insults through letters for years. Finally, Timur backed up his threats with a full-scale invasion of Anatolia in 1402. The Battle of Ankara was fought on July 20th, with Timur's army of 140,000 outnumbering that of Bayezid, who could only muster 80,000 men. It was too much for the Ottomans, who were soundly defeated after having suffered terrible casualties. Bayezid was taken prisoner, later dying in captivity. Timur followed up the conquest of Anatolia by invading and sacking Smyrna. Having claimed the city, Timur carried out mass beheadings in order to put fear into the hearts of the Western powers, who still lay beyond his borders. With the Ottoman Empire now thoroughly subjugated, Timur began to prepare for what would be his greatest conquest of all, Ming China. However, it was not to be. In December 1404, now in his 68th year, he set out on an uncharacteristic winter campaign as part of his initial invasion of China. Before he even crossed the Chinese border, though, he came down with a common cold. The condition worsened, and he died in the town of Fareb on February 17, 1405. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe. If you have any other suggestions for future topics you'd like us to cover, please leave a comment below. And we'll see you next time on History Junkie.